Hello all my bookish friends out there in booktube land, and welcome to another episode of Tristan and the Classics. I am so excited about this video. It's simply a book haul for this month, but boy oh boy are there some gems in it. So stick around for all of them because, well, two of them I would say many of you won't ever have heard of before. So without further ado, let's get stuck in, shall we? Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell. So the first book in our book haul for this month is a book that you may well know the title of, or at least know the name of the protagonist, and it comes from the 18th century. It is the renowned and quite hilarious The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman by Laurence Sterne. Coming as it is in the 18th century, the form of the novel hasn't fully been grounded yet. The novel is a work in progress. Defoe in 1732 has done Robinson Crusoe. That's what you would call probably maybe the first modern novel as we know it. But there's a lot of experimentation and a lot of demand in the 18th century for this growing idea of a novel instead of poetry. And Laurence Sterne... he sort of pushes the limits with what the novel can actually do, and also, I think in many respects, because of Tristram Shandy's narration, shows what it can't do as well. This is just a great romp. Tristram Shandy is the protagonist of the novel, and he's trying to tell us his life story. But the problem is, he can never quite get his thoughts in order, or he can't find the right words or explanations for things, or he feels he's missed out background details which really are useful for you to understand what he's trying to say. So it's full of his constant digressions. He has a theme, but he keeps stopping to go off to explain extra bits because he's not very good at telling the story. And so despite being the protagonist and the constant voice of the narrator, most of the book, and there it is, you're talking 700-800 pages of it, most of the book doesn't necessarily deal with him directly, but more to do with characters in his life as he's grown up, particularly his father, Walter, who is, very splenetic, very angry all of the time, very rational, and he wants things to be ordered. But he's also got his Uncle Toby, who's quite the opposite. Uncle Toby is laid back, gentle. It's almost like the classic Greek comedies where you have the bombast, and then you have what's called the aeron in Greek, which is the guy who doesn't always let on he knows as much as he does, but he's much more mild, much more self-effacing, and it sets up for comedy. But you've also got other characters like Dr. Slop and Corporal Trim, who assists in the family, and Corporal Trim always finding unusual uses for household objects for warfare, like work boots or a hooker pipe that can fire loads of mini cannons at the same time. And there's just endless hilarity. To give you an idea about how this book goes, Tristram Shandy, he talks about how he was always destined to have a bad life because, the humours that make up a person's physique, or personality I should say, according to 18th century medicine, his were disturbed because at the point of conception, his mother asked his father whether he had set the clock, and this mucked up the humours at the point of birth, when he was a homunculus, as he calls it. There are other little events, such as he's supposed to, a big nose is like a Roman nose, will help you in life. So his father says. But Dr. Slop, who helped his mother give birth to Tristram, smashed his nose with a pair of forceps, so that took off one of his advantages in life. He has an unfortunate circumcision incident when he's weeing out of the window because he can't find the chamber pot, and the maid lets the sash window drop on his poor little man. And all these little things add up. Even his name wasn't meant to be Tristram. And apparently, of all the names in the world, all names can give you a head start or a step back in life. Tristram is apparently the worst one you could possibly get. So from the off, his life is a farce. But to listen to him describe things and some of the escapades he goes on, I tell you what, I wouldn't be surprised if Jerome K. Jerome had a lot of inspiration from this book. So that's the first one. Have you ever read The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, Gentleman? It's been a long time for me, but what are your recollections of it? Leave a comment below. Our next book up is indeed an extremely famous one, although I say one, it's part of a compilation of books because it is a short story, and that is the famous Jekyll and Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. So, you know the story of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I think Stevenson actually got the idea of this from a nightmare himself, where he felt the sudden feeling of pure freedom, but not in an innocent way, a lightness of being which took away all inhibitions. And apparently he was screaming in the night and his wife woke him up, and immediately the morning came, he was busy writing Jekyll and Hyde. He wrote it in 3 days and then scrapped it and then rewrote it again. So within about a week you had Jekyll and Hyde. Imagine writing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde within 1 week. That's just insane. Anyway, a lot of Gothic tropes going on inside this book. But what's interesting, this book also has other short stories, not so well known, by Robert Louis Stevenson. So you've got The Merry Men in here, you've got Markheim, and then you've got a story he wrote whilst proofreading Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and that was Olalla. And not many people know too much about Olalla, and I haven't read it, but I've known about it for ages because essentially it's set during the Spanish Peninsular War, and so that's like, I think, 1812-ish time period, beginning of the 19th century. And there's this soldier who he's recovering, and he goes to this residence on a mountainous sort of retreat kind of thing, and there's a mother and a son and a daughter. The daughter's called Olalla. Now, the mother and the son, they're a bit brutish, simple, but they're from an aristocratic background. But he doesn't mind being in their company because they're quite pleasurable company, albeit he thinks they're lazy as anything. But eventually he meets Olalla, and as with many a short book, he falls in love with her straight away, etc. And he wants to run away with her because she's witty and refined and everything that's wonderful about a woman in the 19th century. But she says it can't be. And then something happens to him. I can't spoil it for you. But something happens to him which causes a very unusual reaction by the mother. And he's only just saved from the incident. And it all begins to culminate to a head in which he has to leave the place, giving just one last look behind. And I know that's all very vague, but I can't give away anything more because it's a short story. There's very much, I mean really, Gothic style was on Stevenson's mind, because if he was writing Jekyll and Hyde at the same time as writing this, it's got everything Gothic about it. An aristocratic family that's sort of fallen from grace, a dilapidated large building. By the way, if you haven't watched my video on 8 aspects of the Gothic literature, please go and watch it. It's actually doing really well on YouTube. It's getting viewed quite a lot now. And it will give you a good insight into what actually makes a Gothic book. And you will find all of those features in Olalla and in Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So yeah, go and watch that video, then go and read one of those 2 stories because you'll thoroughly enjoy it. Some think that Olalla might be supernatural. It's got that undertone, but like a lot of Gothic, the supernatural plays its role, but it has a reasonable explanation. So there you go. Robert Louis Stevenson's Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and other short stories, including Olalla. So that was number 2. Now, before we come to our 3rd book in the book haul, it's just occurred to me that I might be pronouncing Olalla wrong. It might be Olaya, because it's double L in Spanish. That's sort of got a here noise to it, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, any Spanish speakers out there. But there you go, anyway. So, our 3rd book. Now, we're really coming to 3 books that not a great deal of people have, I say not a great deal of people have read. They're classics, so many have read them, but they're not the most well-known classics. And the amazing thing about these 3 is they are all modern classics. So the first one is Goodbye to All That by Robert Graves. Now, this is why I say people have read it. Goodbye to All That is a very well-known book. but lots of people haven't read it, and that includes me. I've been wanting to read this for ages, but it's been quite expensive to buy. Now, the 5 books I've got come from this second-hand bookshop. Well, it's not even a shop, it's a storage unit. And I picked all 5 of these up for like £2.50. And I was so thrilled to get such a good copy of Goodbye to All That. So, Robert Graves in this book is basically telling his autobiography, starting, at the Charterhouse when he was a pupil there and had a terrible, torrid time with the other kids. And he's growing up in England. And what you have to remember about Robert Graves is in 1929, he left Britain for good. He never wanted to go back. Hence the phrase, goodbye to all that. It's actually a dismissive phrase. And it has some of the most harrowing and brilliant sketches of life in the World War I trenches because Graves himself was there. He also meets characters like Thomas Hardy, he meets, and Siegfried Sassoon and Bertram Russell. He's mixed with some real high-level literary people and intelligentsia. And he just explains what he's got from his life, how it's affected him. But it is called one of the most true autobiographies ever because he doesn't necessarily bring himself off in a great light. But yeah, why does he want to say goodbye to all that is pretty much what you'll get from this book. It's supposedly very moving as well. And if you're into the First World War, it's definitely a book that you should have read. So our last 2 books are books which I don't know if any one of you has read. If you have, please comment below. But I'm sure for a lot of you, if you listen to them explained, it might give you something to put on your to-be read list. The first one, do you like spies? Do you like all that thriller kind of genre? Well, this guy is a classic writer. In fact, he sort of tweaked the spy genre himself. His name is Eric Ambler. Have you ever heard of him? He's written he's written quite a few books, some quite famous for those who know Ambler. He also helped write detective series as well for TV. But this one is called Uncommon Danger. I'll give you the lowdown on what this story is about and see what it sounds like to you. So there's a guy, a double agent, Russian, I think his name's Borisov. He's got some papers with him and he's leaving Russia. And these papers are about how the Russians, or the Russian government, are going to attack and take over an area of Europe called Bessarabia. Bessarabia is today northern Bulgaria, Ukraine. So that's quite interesting in light of times today. So Russia want to attack and take hold of that because it's rich, especially in oil resources and in farming resources. The problem is, if these papers get known about, then the state like Romania will want to join the fascists of Nazi Germany to sort of protect themselves from the aggression of the Russians coming in. And at this time, Ambler himself was very much worried about fascist Germany and thought the only good counterweight was communist Russia. But anyway, so what happens is the Russians send 2 spies called the Zayelhofs, and they're a brother and sister, and they've got to chase Borisov. So they're after him. But someone in charge of a British petroleum company, he wants to know who's going to have the rights to sort of extract the oil from Bessarabia. And so he sends out his own people to track down these letters as well. He wants to find out who's going to finally be in control. But the person that he sends out, the other 2 spies, the Zayelhofs, realise this is none other than a hired assassin who is really famous and scary. So there's these 2, and he's got a henchman with him. So there's this 2 couples chasing this one man. But that's not the main character. The main character is a journalist called Kenton. And he's on his way on a train to Vienna, where he's supposed to do some journalist report on some high-level Nazis. And he bumps into a guy on the train, sort of a not exactly squeaky clean guy, a bit shady, called Sachs. And Sachs has got a letter which he needs to smuggle through customs. And he's going to be suspected. Now, because Kenton is down on his luck and has been gambling, he needs money, and Sachs says, if you can take this letter and then deliver it to me later on in this hotel, I'll give you 600 marks. Well, Kenton needs the money, so he takes the letter. When he goes to deliver it at the hotel later, guess what? Sachs is dead, murdered. And suddenly, Kenton, who knows nothing of the world of espionage, is in a race for his life, not realising just how dangerous this information is that he's carrying. How does that sound to you for a story? Brilliant, isn't it? And this is something about Eric Ambler. What he introduced to the spy genre is, instead of it being a world of spies, of trained spies, trained assassin, trained intelligence communities like Le Carré, for instance, Ambler introduces the innocent bystander idea, trope. Someone who is not a spy, who is bumbling about, doesn't know how to escape, but then has to work on their wits to make a plan to get away from people far more deadly, lethal and trained than they are. That's what Ambler actually introduces into the spy genre, and adds it in quite a realistic way as well. I think some would call him sort of thriller, spy thriller realism. So have you read Eric Ambler? Make a comment down below if you have. If you haven't, are you going to read this? It's actually a short book. Let's have a look. 230 pages. So I'll tell you what I think when I'm finished with it. So, the final and fifth book in this month's book haul. Oh, I am so excited about this because I've wanted to get into it for ages, but getting hold of the books is one of the problems. So when I go into this storage space with just crates full of books, imagine my delight when some of the books parted like the Red Sea before Moses, and lo and behold, staring at me was August 1914, the first volume in the Red Wheel series by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Man, was I excited. Solzhenitsyn wrote this. I think his idea came in the late 40s, to write this sequence of books, which would be part fiction, part history, part historiography of the Russian Revolution from a Russian perspective. And he began writing it, and starting here 1914, August 1914, so we're talking the outbreak of the First World War, and that's where the whole cycle starts. And you have is it a colonel or a general or a captain? It's a soldier, Vorontsov, I think his name is. I can't remember how you pronounce it exactly. He is sent to the front, the battlefront in Eastern Prussia, where the Russians, right at the beginning of the war, make an attack. And he's sent by the Grand Duke, the commander of the Russian forces, to find out what's going on and to report back. Now, when he gets there, they're embroiled in what would eventually be called the Battle of Tannenberg, which was an absolute disaster, like a debacle for the Russian army. Almost knocked them out of the war straight away. It was a 4-day-long battle. Now, when he gets there, he realises, because of bad communication, terrible roads, this is 1914, horse and cart, he can't get, by the time he gets back to headquarters in Russia, it will be too late for anything to be done at this battle. So he decides to stick around and help out as best he can. And you then get an overview of the Battle of Tannenberg and things going on the field. And you get introduced to General Samsonov, who oversees this catastrophe and can't face reporting how dreadful a loss it was back to the Emperor, and so kills himself. So that's sort of the initial part, a large section of the book. But it also then goes on through loads of disparate lives on the battlefield and off the battlefield. So this will match up with Robert Graves quite well. He'll do the Western Front, Solzhenitsyn's got the Eastern Front. And he sort of explores in this, like allegorically, a bit like the Radetzky March does when it comes to an allegory of the fall of the Habsburg Empire. This is the fall of Tsarist Russia through the early stages of the First World War, because the revolution, with the Bolshevik Revolution, would take over in 1917. But it's the first of a bunch of books. I mean, this isn't a light read. Solzhenitsyn's not exactly renowned for that, you know, Gulag Archipelago and all that. This is like 790 pages long. And it's book one, volume one. After this, in the Red Wheel cycle, you have, if I remember correctly, August 1914, and then is it October 1916, and then you have March 1917, and then another book, April 1917. He wanted to go further into the 20s, but that's as far as it got. So that's going to be one grand sweep. You can always trust the Russian authors to make a very, very big sweep of history. Just think of War and Peace by Tolstoy. So that's Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He's also quite a bit of the philosopher, and he was kicked out of, he was kicked out of the Soviet Union because of writing this. So it wasn't published there. He had to go abroad to America before he could get it all published. And it was first published in Paris, I believe, without his knowledge. But he consented to that when he found out. So there it is. Have you ever read anything of The Red Wheel by Solzhenitsyn? Please make a comment if you have. Or have you even heard of this cycle of volumes? So that was my book haul for this month of April. 5 books, some relatively well known. Jekyll and Hyde, extremely well known. The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, that's a quite recognised name. Goodbye to All That, again, quite a famous title to a book, but a lesser, not as much read an author, Robert Graves, more of the poet, of course. And then we've got Eric Ambler and Solzhenitsyn's Red Wheel series. Which one of these interests you? And what classics have you bought or got into this month? Share below. And also, don't forget to go and see that video on 8 aspects of Gothic literature. Link is in the description below. Until the next time, my wonderful bookish friends, I wish you joy in your reading.